It's been reported that Rishi Sunak has personally intervened to stop officials from scrapping a contract worth around 40 million to provide him with private helicopter rides. According to the Sunday Times, the Ministry of Defence announced it would stop renting 2 helicopters used for VIP flights for the Prime Minister. It's believed the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, reversed the decision at Sunak's request. Now, joining me is the lovely GB News political correspondent, Katherine Forster, to tell us more about this story. Katherine, what's going on here?
Yes, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, getting into some hot water over his helicopter habit. This is something that he's come in for quite a lot of criticism for over the last year. It was worked out that in a period of 6 months, he'd taken 23 domestic flights by private jet or helicopter, working out at nearly 1 a week. And last May, he took a helicopter from London to Southampton to a pharmacy. Now, London to Southampton, a fairly short journey by car or by train, a lot less money, a lot less emissions. So perhaps stung by criticism, the MOD announced in the summer that it was going to get rid of the contract it has with a private company worth about 40 million over 5 years, so 8 million a year, to basically lease 2 helicopters to the MOD for the use of the Prime Minister. So that was announced, that was happening, and now it's emerged via the chap who was in charge of the helicopters on behalf of the MOD in a House magazine, that in fact in mid-September, the new Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, reversed that decision, and that came directly at the request of Rishi Sunak. Now, plenty of people will say, well, he's a very busy man, he needs to use his time wisely. But I do think, given that he's very, very rich, we know he's worth about 550 million, given the focus on net zero, getting emissions down, and given the looming election, it will rather play into Labour's the Prime Minister's out of touch, he doesn't understand what ordinary people are going through narrative.
Katherine, thank you very much for that. And that's our Katherine Forster, GB News political correspondent. I'm staggered by this story, to be honest with you, because the flight Katherine was talking to there was, as she said, down to Southampton, a pharmacy, to make an announcement about saving money on the NHS while spending God knows how much on a helicopter. And he sent his team down by train. Now, why couldn't he just get on the train? Dennis, I'm going to come to you first on this one. This is just playing straight into the hands of Labour and everyone else that thinks Rishi Sunak, who's married to a multimillionaire, billionaire, is his wife, billionaire, is completely out of touch with what it's like in the real world.
Sure. I mean, he's got enough money to pay for himself, not even notice. I find an astonishing lack of judgment. It's like that row with the Greek Prime Minister the other week when he set up the meeting, then cancelled it at the last moment, caused a huge diplomatic storm. He's just got no political normal judgment. Margaret Thatcher used to get the early morning BA flight if she's going up to Glasgow or Edinburgh or down to Cardiff, just like anybody else. I used to bump into Tony Blair on the LNER train coming down from the north when I was an MP. We were incredibly careful when I was a minister at the Foreign Office. We could take EasyJet, we'd take Ryanair. It wasn't a problem. But Rishi just lives in Planet Rishi, which is utterly disconnected from anybody else in the country.
While I don't expect the Prime Minister to literally, get trains all over the place, I expect he is the Prime Minister. He's obviously got a very important job to do. He's very busy. But this is a bit ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, it's completely out of touch.
I don't care very much if he wants to use a helicopter and there are emissions from that. If it's something that is necessary, it's something that is required by, the necessities of his schedule. And so it makes sense. Obviously, this is a lot of flights. Probably not all of these were essential, especially if his team is going down on the train, then they have to be there at the same time so he could take the train. One of the trips was down to Clacton-on-Sea. It's actually very quick on the train. It's just in Essex, not very far.
Hold on. He actually took a helicopter to Clacton.
But I do think it's important to mention that according to the report on this, it does say that in some cases he privately met the cost. So on 2 helicopter trips, £16,000, it looks as if he paid that himself. So yes, I think that it is important that the Prime Minister does have access to these sorts of things when there's a necessity. But you do have to, like you were saying, you do have to use your judgment.
He still does,
on
Emma.
it.
I mean,
and it's wasteful. But then I think actually within the civil service and within politics, and particularly within local politics, there is a culture of wastefulness when it comes to taxpayer money, and a lot of they're handling huge sums of money, and when put against that, actually this is a big amount to us as individuals, but in terms of government budget it's actually not very much. So I think it's a problem with the culture of wastefulness within the government, and a lack of perspective. But I don't really have so much of a problem if he needs to take a helicopter.
I get that. As I said, I don't expect him to get the bus down the road. But I mean, it's the fact that the Minister of Defence made a sensible decision to stop doing this. It's wasting too much money, and the MOD doesn't disclose the precise cost of every flight, but the fuel is thought to cost £1,200 alone. So it's going to be very expensive. So the Minister of Defence sensibly decided to stop this, and then Rishi Sunak appears to have intervened personally.
That's the sickening thing about it. And I use that word sickening quite deliberately. Of course a Prime Minister can take a helicopter or a private jet. I mean, I've been on them with Blair years ago. It's absolutely normal. But there's some sense of proportion that Rishi just doesn't have, and it's sad, really, for him, because I mean, compared to the previous clowns we had in at number 10 since 2016, he does seem to have some feet on the ground, and this is the kind of story that it's just going to cost him so many more votes. Why is he making these mistakes?
Well, you pointed out that he and his wife are very independently wealthy, and I do wonder whether it has something to do with his own personal experience and what he's used to. And so maybe he doesn't realise that this is something that is going to play. So maybe his instinct is off slightly.
I sat beside Prince Andrew once at dinner for the Swiss president. We were just having a little chat, and he said that Prince Charles was going to fly out to Davos, where Charles took all the boys and children in cloisters next door to Davos, and he was going to take a BA flight. And Andrew said, he phoned me up and said, what's it like? Because the last time he took a B8 flight, he had so many pieces of luggage, it wouldn't fit into the hold. And then Andrew's a helicopter pilot, said that the MOD had changed the rules for royal flights, so they all had to be much more heavily financed by the palace. It was techie accounting stuff. I mean, the Queen could suck this up. What's wrong with Rishi Sunak?
I do think it is important to point out that sometimes in terms of value for money, it is actually more cost efficient to charter a plane if it is between certain locations and to fit and so course. If you were to book all of those people who need to go on that trip onto a commercial jet, it would actually cost more money. So sometimes it is more cost efficient. So I think, or setting all of that aside, obviously his judgment on this is off target.
It is astonishing that the Prime Minister of this country just didn't see that might play out badly.
He doesn't see so many obvious goofs. I would go back to snubbing the Greek Prime Minister, who's pro-British, is a friend of Britain, same political family. Just as you dared
mention the Elgin Marbles, wasn't it?
It was Parthenon Marbles. No, I mean, that was all set up beforehand, and he mentions it every time he comes here. Nobody knows. I think Rishi thought that there's anybody in the Red Wall that's panting there to keep the Parthenon marbles. They were looted 200 years ago by a horrible...
They weren't looted. They were legitimately illegally purchased. But let's not go down that rabbit hole.
No, we're not talking about that. I don't want to talk about the Elgin marbles, no.
Anyway, but in general, he just makes little mistake after little mistake. I mean, a lot of people in Europe will be saying, what is he doing? Not meeting Mrs. Meloni, Signora Meloni. That's quite normal. She's the Prime Minister of Italy, and Italy's a very important country. And she's completely come in to embrace the EU, having been very anti-European. Good. But going to this weird cult festival and wacko right-wingers from all over the world...
It's a bit of an odd description of it.
What, Steve Bannon? Victor Orban.
Now I'm going to have to accuse you of being silly.
Right, come on. You can have the silly debate now. Go on, we've got time. Go on. He called you silly. Now you call him silly. Go on.
I don't think it's silly or an exaggeration, going back to our earlier conversation about the NHS, to suggest that the bureaucracy of the NHS is somewhat overindulged when we have people who are being paid over £100,000 for jobs that probably shouldn't exist, while nurses and doctors on the front line aren't being paid as much. So I don't think it's an exaggeration or silly to point out that in many ways the way that the NHS works as a bureaucracy is comparable.
I don't agree completely, and that's what Wes Streeting's been saying non-stop since he was named as Shadow Health Secretary, and it is music to my ears. Tony Blair tried a lot of that. He got scars on the back, he said, from trying to reform the NHS and public services. It is the huge challenge for every government. But let's be honest, the biggest expansion of the civil service and public employees in British history has happened in the last 13 years under a Tory government.
Well, absolutely. They've used more helicopters as well. What more can we say? We're just not going down the Elgin Marbles route. That's another day, OK?